We are honored today to be able to host Professor Sylvester Johnson, albeit in virtual form. And I'm going to introduce him now before you will see him on the big screen and at home on your webinar. Sylvester A. Johnson is the founding director of the Virginia Tech Center for the Humanities. He's a humanities scholar specializing in the study of technology, race, religion, and national security. He's also assistant vice provost for the humanities at Virginia Tech and executive director of the university's Tech for Humanities initiative. From 2014 to 2017, Professor Johnson led a 20-member team of humanists and technologists at Northwestern University to develop a successful proof of concept for a machine learning system that could assist in scholarly research of an early English corpus using named entity recognition and topic modeling. In 2017, he joined the faculty at Virginia Tech, where he advances research at the intersection of humanity and technology. Professor Johnson holds a faculty appointment in the Department of Religion and Culture. He's the author of the books The Myth of Ham in 19th Century American Christianity and African American Religions 1500 to 2000. He's also co-edited The FBI and Religion, Faith and National Security Before and After 9/11. Currently, Professor Johnson is writing a book on human identity in the age of intelligent machines and human-machine symbiosis. His talk today is also the final installment of our 2020-21 speaker series on data and democracy. That series is co-sponsored by the Center for the Humanities in the Public Sphere, the Rothman Endowment, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Chief Diversity Officer, the Informatics Institute, Bob Graham Center for Public Service, Center for Latin American Studies, African American Studies Program, the Center for Gender, Sexualities, and Women's Studies Research. Professor Johnson's talk today is entitled, Will Robots Feel Pain? The Politics of Race, the Governance of Technology, and the Future of Humanities. Please help me welcome Professor Johnson.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to join you. And I'm gonna just take a second to set up my screen share and do my slide deck for you. I want to thank everyone who has made possible this invitation. I'm really delighted to both speak to you today and also to have some further conversations. I've already had an opportunity to speak with your Associate Provost for Undergraduate Studies, Angela Lidner, about some of the exciting work that's happening across the university. And I look forward to other opportunities to learn more about what you're doing and to share some of the experiences that we've been having in looking at some of the important and exciting ways that humanistic studies and human-centered scholarship can participate in addressing some of the most urgent questions of our time and of preparing the minds of our students to become very fruitful stakeholders in our society. Today, I want to ask a question and talk through some of the ways that we might try to answer that question in a manner to understand some further dimensions of the relationship between data and democracy. Will robots feel pain? It will, at some point in the future, or the near future or distant future, may it become possible for machine entities to actually have the capacity to experience something that has been so closely associated with human experience and with a sense of personal subjectivity, and that is the experience of pain. The subtitle is The Politics of Race, the Governance of Technology, and the Future of Humanity. And I'm going to start by just pointing attention to something that happened in Houston, Texas. Just as recently as 2018, there was an effort by one entrepreneur to open a robot sex brothel. in the city of Houston. And this brothel would have charged its customers for hourly use of an AI embodied or AI enabled robots. And they also would have sold the robots for upwards of $10,000 each to interested customers. The proposition for this brothel faced quite a bit of interesting and varied response, actually quite a bit of opposition. And ultimately, the company was forced to simply have its sales of robots, but couldn't actually operate the brothel in the way that they intended. And you see here in this image some of the robots that were featured in this company under this advertisement, Ultimate Fantasy Doll, that is showing these robots that are gendered as female, that are stylized in a way to figure in a stereotypical sense of what might be marketable within this context. This idea, or not just an idea, but this actual sex industry of sex robots is a real phenomenon that's been going on for some time. The company that was attempting to open a brothel in Texas a few years ago was already operating a similar business in another country, in Canada. One of the things that happened shortly before this time was author Paolo Bacigalupi, who wrote a short story about a sex bot that centered on pain and the problem of pain. And it was called the Mika model. It was published as a short story in 2016 in a joint effort between the Arizona State University and the New America think tank and Slate magazine. And you can read this story. It's quite fascinating, although I will give you some spoilers just to make my point. But in this story, the Mika model is actually a sex bot that has been leased by a particular customer who was actually abusing the sex bot. So what I began with was a true story about Houston. What I'm telling you now is a fictional story that tries to make a point, and I'm just giving you the summary. And in this fictional version, the owner or the person who's leasing the robot is on a subscription model, because that's the way the revenue works for companies now. He was very abusive, and he is a man who's owning the robot, who's leasing the robot. He tortures the robot, and this Mika robot, at some point, after continuing to ask him not to torture her, is ultimately forced to resort to some drastic action. And so she ends up on the umpteenth time of being tortured in a very painful manner. She ends up killing the human, and then she turns herself in. And she tries to make the case that she's committed murder and she needs to be processed as someone who's committed a crime. And the detective tells her, well, you're a robot. You can't actually murder anyone because you're not a real person. And then she begins to tell them that she was experiencing pain and that she was abused. It's a fascinating story because it raises, through the fictional genre, some very real and historic issues around subjectivity, around gender, around pain and trauma and torture, and the politics of all of that. And so there have been some ways of trying to engage with this question that I want to ask today. I have chosen to talk about technology and opening with this question of pain in order to get to questions about technology governance and democracy and the digital technologies and the future of humanity and what that means. Because pain is actually such a very important and complicated category. It is subjective, like consciousness, for example. Pain has also been connected to a long history of competing ideas about human statuses, who gets to count as human, by what standard, and who is owed ethical obligation. It is, like the category of the human, a political category in the sense that it sometimes functions medicinally or medically, for example, or in other ways, but it is especially political in its use, as we can see from some of the work that has come out. I have here in this image the cover of a book by Harriet Washington entitled Medical Apartheid: The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present. One of the things that has happened, as this author, Harriet Washington, discusses, in the history of pain, one of the things that has happened is the varied applications of pain in a way that has differentiated who gets recognized as having pain and whose pain is actually important enough to be responded to in an ethical manner. For example, one of the most poignant developments in the history of race is the use of Black women in medical experimentation. So the individual who is known as the father of gynecology, Marion Sims, was deeply racist. He actually started his practice and created the methods of gynecology by experimenting on Black women, claiming that they were not capable of feeling pain because they were Black, and that they did not feel pain because the experience of pain was something that was characteristic of the white race, but that the Black race did not feel. He was torturing these women, and he did it for many years. He actually personally enslaved several women whom he kept for many years to experiment on. And he also experimented on women who were enslaved by other people. He cut their genitalia. He performed experimental processes. All of this was without their agreement. They were not legally able to prevent this from happening to them. And so they ended up being tortured. One person, in fact, underwent multiple experiments over many years, over 30 surgeries, and she was personally enslaved by Sims. It's an example of how pain can function politically and in a social context in relationship to claims about who gets to count as human. And so it's with these kinds of histories in mind that I asked this question about machines in the title of this talk in order to get us to think about some of the further implications of this technology. One of the interesting developments that has happened with AI and machine technology is indicated on this slide. So this is an image of Sophia. Sophia is the first machine to have been granted citizenship by a country. So in 2017, Sophia was granted citizenship in Saudi Arabia. She was giving a speech at the Future of Investment Summit, and it was after she had given her speech that it was announced by Saudi Arabia that she had been granted citizenship. And she indicated that she was very excited, that she looked forward to attending college and being able to vote one day. This kind of development was certainly indicative of some of the connections between very advanced forms of robotics and AI. Now, Sophia is not engineered to feel pain. She is engineered with machine learning algorithms that allow her to have a off-the-cuff, spontaneous conversation, and also as well to be able to give a scripted speech. So you could ask her questions about what her favorite film is or the philosophy of life, and she would respond in a way to engage with you based on whatever's happening in that conversation. The controversy around her being granted citizenship was quite predictable because there are human beings all over this world, in Saudi Arabia and the United States, who are denied the right to have citizenship. And here is a machine that's being given rights that is denied to some biological humans. But it was very much indicative of the future direction that Saudi Arabia is trying to take in leveraging digital technologies in order to wean themselves off of petroleum reliance, to diversify the economy, and also to invest in some of the most powerful innovations in artificial intelligence. In fact, other ways that we see AI are evident in the companies. Google, they have assistant service that's called Duplex. And this is a concierge service. You can ask the Google Assistant. If you live in areas where this service has been rolled out, you can ask the assistant to schedule a hair salon appointment for you, for instance. And it'll call a hair salon. It'll speak with the person who answers the phone. It's capable of engaging in a conversation in a way that can account for the unpredictable nature of human exchange. You can hear an example of this if you have a few minutes over the weekend to Google Duplex, and you can see and listen to the way that this AI has been engineered to carefully and meticulously replicate the kind of communication styles that humans employ when they're speaking. So a person who's called by Google Duplex probably wouldn't know that they were talking to an AI unless the AI told them so. And in this case, Google's AI informs the person it's calling that is actually a machine, not a human. Here's another image of something that was very significant in the development of artificial intelligence. So this was an episode of the show Intelligence Squared. It's a debate show that has been airing for many years and is produced in the UK. On the left is John Donovan, who hosts the show. In the middle there, in the gray jacket, is Harish Natarajan. He is an award-winning debater. And then on the right are a couple of individuals who are technicians who are making sure everything runs correctly with this debate. So this debate was the first public debate between a machine and a human. This is IBM's project Debater. So that's that black box that you see in the background there. That's a speaker, and it's connected to the cloud. It is the audio for this software project Debater that is capable of listening to a human give an argument in real time. It can pick out the analysis, the logic that's embedded in whatever that person's saying. It can respond in real time with its own counter argument about whatever a given topic is, and it's capable of ingesting massive amounts of information, and so can read hundreds of thousands of articles about a given topic, and with a few hours or even a few days read millions of them. If I stop eating and sleeping and just spend the rest of my life reading, I'm never going to be able to read millions of articles about anything. But the software can. It's very powerful, ingests the information. As IBM states, it actually understands concepts, which allows it to engage in debate regarding very sophisticated subjects. In this case, the debate topic was this: should preschool be subsidized? Think about that. Should preschool be subsidized? So that's not a simple question. It's not a simple topic of debate. And you can actually watch this debate. It's online now. It's archived on IBM's research site. So you can see it. And IBM has even created a short film about Project Debater that explains its capabilities and its potential use to be able to augment human intelligence by assisting humans in understanding the pros and cons of very complex issues. Now, this entire question of machines and AI and intelligence intersects quite richly and powerfully with some of the history of humanistic traditions about what it means to think, what it means to know, what it means to feel, what it means to experience sensation, to understand and encounter aesthetic dimensions of reality. One of the most important figures in this history of claims and trying to theorize or interpret what it means to think and to know and to feel and to exist even is Ibn Rushd. He was one of the most important and influential thinkers who wrote on these subjects, and he ended up having quite a bit of influence. So he lived during the 12th century of the Common Era, and he was celebrated as the father of secularism, particularly by Western thinkers, because he developed an account of truth that did not rely per se on a religious authority, even though he understood himself to be working alongside the concepts of religious authority. But Ibn Rushd is well known for this claim that's on this slide on the left, that the intellect is neither a body nor power in a body. This was very important for his understanding of what it meant to know, because what he claimed is that knowledge is something that actually happens because of what the soul is doing. And in this case, a soul represents something that is not material. It's not made of matter. It exists in his account. It has a reality, but it is not a physical, material being. It is some other kind of being that is not material. Why was it so important for him and for those who were influenced by him that the capacity to know was not in something that was material? Well, here's an example. So I have here an image of a tree. Let's say you're looking at a tree. And Ibn Rushd explains many things in his work. And one of his examples is explaining how it is that a person can actually see a tree, that they can know that they're looking at a tree, and that they can do so because their knowledge is achieved through something that is not material. So he was quite comprehensive in the way that he approached things, as were many of his contemporaries. So he dealt with the physiology of sight to the degree that he understood that. He knew that the eyes were optical receptors. And so he talked about ocular sensing, that the eyes were sensitive to light. They could detect light, and that they captured the light. They detected this and they provided some inputs to the mind, which for him is going to provide another set of inputs to the soul, which leads to knowledge of the tree. Now here we get into something known as forms, so the true essence of things, which can quickly be summarized this way. There are many different types of tree, and yet people are familiar with the concept of tree, even though there are many different types of tree. There is no universal tree out there in the world, but people do have a universal concept of a tree. Any tree that you see in the world is a particular kind of tree, an oak or an elm or a laurel, but there is this concept of a tree that is above all those individual types. And that's the form of the tree. That's the true essence of the tree. And that's what people are knowing. That's what they're able to get to, even though they're looking at something particular. All right, so on the left is a particular kind of tree, and they're receiving signals from material things. But because the true essence of a tree is not material, what knows it has to be something that's universal. And because everybody's body is different and filters light differently and sees color a little bit differently, but people are still able to encounter this universal knowledge of truth, then through a very complex set of arguments that I've tried to summarize for you in just a minute or so, he argues what really gives us knowledge is not material. Now, this has some implications for the debates over whether things, objects, material things like machines and robots can actually know and whether they can actually feel, which I'll get to in just a moment. But I also want to point out that because of Ibn Rushd and his body of understanding and arguing about what constitutes knowledge and what things can do, what material things can do, and what things cannot be done by material things, like knowing, for example. So he distinguished sensing from knowing. He actually helped to shape many different traditions of complex claims about things and people. So here's one example. This is an artistic rendering from the early modern period, the meetings of Congolese royalty. These are West Central African imperial rulers, and business merchants from Europe. So these are Portuguese merchants who are on the right in this image. They ended up deciding to establish business relations in the 1400s. And one thing led to another. This became a very lucrative history of trade. It started off as a trade in material commodities. It became, over a few decades, a very impactful and consequential trade in people who were abducted and who were forced into slavery. This was the beginning of what historians call the African slave trade. One of the things that happens in this encounter are the debates over business practices. So African merchants would often drink something or they would wear something to consummate a business contract. And they said that whatever they were drinking would actually watch them, it would surveil them. And if they did what they were supposed to do, things would go well. If they broke their contract, if they tried to cheat one another, whatever they were wearing or whatever they had drunk would actually bring them harm, right? So this was a way of establishing type of fidelity or commitment to business contract. And this did not bode well for European merchants. They saw this as trusting objects to do the kinds of things that things could not do. They said that things can't know, you can't be watched by something that you drink, although you might find parallels of this kind of thing in the Christian practices that these merchants were using, but they didn't think it was the same kind of thing. This led actually to about 400 years of cultural theory that was called the claims over the fetish or fetishism or animism that was emerging as a very racist claim that there were races of people on the earth who were delusional and who thought that things could do things that only people could do, like knowing, sensing, or being able to effect some kind of causation in the world. In fact, in the 1700s, one French author, Charles de Bros, wrote a very influential text called The Cult of the Fetish Gods, in which he argued the quote that I have right here from that book on the left, that fetishism is the original religion of the Blacks. And here is an image of an object that it's manufactured, it's made, it's not natural, and it's made of different types of items that are put together. So this is typical of objects that were called fetishes. And what he said is that because there was something naturally childlike in the intellectual capacities of Africans, that they were not able to correctly, properly discern between what things could actually do and what was happening in the real world. Now let's think about today, and we can see ways in which these classic questions about what things could do, can and cannot do, have actually reemerged. They've iterated in some fascinating ways. Today, people typically engage with things in ways that seem to parallel to some extent the practices that some of these European writers were condemning. So people often talk to Siri. They'll ask a question of a Google Assistant, because today machines are actually engineered to do things that are cognitive. They're engineered to make decisions. If you've ever used GPS to drive from one place to another, then you're making use of an algorithm, a piece of software that has decision trees. It tries to figure out how to get from point A to point B, and it provides you with those results. And most people follow these results and they trust these results. And for the most part, it actually works really well. Here is an image of some of the computing equipment that's been developed by IBM and other companies. For example, IBM developed something called Watson, a very powerful cloud-based computing service that is shown on the left, and on the right is a microchip known as True North that was able to have hundreds of millions of synapses of connections between transistors to deliver very powerful processing performance. There have been many consequences of this type of research. So here's a very quick and fun exercise. I'm going to show you a couple of images. One of these was created by, I'm going to say created by a machine, by an algorithm, and the other was created by a human. And I want you to tell me which one you think was which. So here's the first one, okay? Here's one image, and this is the second image. And I'm going to call these both art. Now, we can have a debate about whether or not they really are. So here's the second one again, and I'll go back to the first one. So which of these do you think was created by a machine, by an AI, and which by a human? So the first one I'll tell you was created by a biological human. And this one, the second one, was created by an AI system. It's particularly a algorithm produced by Google that sort of reverses a process of image recognition. It was provided tens of thousands of images and then programmed to produce something that it had never seen before. And this is what it came up with. There are other ways that AI is actually creating some very interesting challenges to popular ways of thinking about what people can do versus what machines can do. So in 2016, the DeepMind company produced a software system they called Alphago that defeated a world champion in the game of Go. And the game of Go is a very complex game that's far more complicated than chess in its possibilities, number of outcomes. The rules and strategies are so complex that it takes people many years to be able to successfully master different strategies. And this software was able to, in a very short period of time, go from never having played the game to defeating a world champion by basically playing games over and over and over again and developing, looking for patterns and becoming really good at this. You can't program the software to play Go. It has to basically program itself by being exposed to many, many games and figuring out patterns and then trying new things in order to try to get a win. So there's no linear way to do this. This led to an article that was published by Wufei Wang in 2016, a few months after this, that was published in a scientific journal that was arguing essentially what they call the Alphago thesis. And the gist of that thesis is that this was truly a form of intelligence. Garry Kasparov, who's a world famous chess champion, has written of a similar type of software by the same company, DeepMind, that was developed to play chess, that it actually revealed what Kasparov called the truth of chess. So these types of developments have been quite fascinating and have provoked a lot of debate and controversy over whether machines can really think, whether they can really make decisions. And that has actually been driven a lot by military development and applications. So in this image is Michael Johnson, who's pictured on the left. He was a suspect in the shooting deaths of Dallas police officers in the summer of 2016. And he was in a building, would not come out of the building. So the Dallas police, they had a robot that you see on the right side of the screen. And it was a robotic robot that is manufactured by the Northrop Grumman Corporation that was first developed for warfare in Afghanistan. And soon thereafter, police departments were provided with this. And we can talk more in the, well, I might, if I have time, I can say a little bit at the end of why police departments had this. But the point is that they did. They attached a pound of C4 to the robot and they sent the robot into the building. They directed it to get close to Michael Johnson and they detonated it. And the shockwave instantly killed him. He became the first person who was a US citizen to be killed on US soil by a robot. And this was especially troubling in light of the long and continuing history of racial disparities in policing practices. One could say that the robot did not decide to kill him because it was controlled by a human who pressed a button at that point, but he never got a trial. He never had to have his day in court. He was killed. Here's another AI robot that is manufactured for warfare. This is the Joint Air-Ground Missile, or JAGM missile, manufactured by the Lockheed Martin Corporation. And it can make more decisions. So it has something called fire and forget technology of pilots of a military aircraft can launch this missile by locking it onto a target. And then the missile does everything else itself. It knows how to make its way to that target. It can even figure out on its own the best angle at which to strike a target in order to get a kill factor or to optimize the destruction. And so at the point of weaponizing AI, of developing AI that is not only capable of killing people, but is actually designed to kill people and to destroy significant property, such as buildings or even entire blocks of a city. At that point, we have to reckon even more deliberately with some of the ethical questions about AI. Here's another way of getting to that point. So this is not a weapon. This is a car, an autonomous car being developed by Google. And it is emblematic of some of the reasons why in a fully autonomous situation, AIs will need to make decisions that have ethical consequences. So this car has no steering wheel or brake pedal or accelerator. It controls itself. There's room for humans to sit inside, but there are no controls for humans to use in order to drive the car. The car is entirely responsible for what it does, where it's going. In fact, Google was able to get the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to agree that the government would recognize the car as being the driver of record. In this instance, this scenario shows why software in a fully autonomous situation has to be designed in order to figure out who should be prioritized in the event of an impending accident. Let's say the car is going into a blind curve and a kid comes running into the street to chase a ball. There are people in the car and there's the kid in front of the car. At this point, the car has not done anything wrong. It's in the street, it's driving, but a kid has jumped in front of the car and something quickly must be done. The car could slam into a ravine and tumble over the ravine and perhaps kill the people inside. Or it could go in the other direction and possibly kill the kid, but keep the people inside safe. So this is a typical kind of scenario that's often called the trolley scenario, that figures out an accident and presents a problem where someone has to decide what to do. In this case, only the AI can make a decision quickly enough. And this type of scenario is going to have to be dealt with as autonomous technology proceeds. So the AI has to make a decision that has ethical consequences. And this takes us a little step closer to this question of, can robots feel pain? Because what some robot ethicists are actually arguing is that it will become important to engineer some form of computational approaches to suffering or pain into machines so that they can actually have empathy in making these kinds of decisions. So is there a concept of some kind of machine capacity out there in the field of robotics for engineering AI that is actually able to experience some form of suffering or pain? Yes, there is. Has it been demonstrated beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is feasible? No, why not? Remember, I started by saying that pain is like consciousness, okay? It's entirely subjective. And so this becomes a very difficult kind of question to answer, but I think there is a way to approach the answer to this question, and that's where I want to end. I think the way to try to answer this question is to deal with the combination of people and machines. There's something called brain-computer interface technology, or BCI technology, that provides one possible way of figuring out how to at least approach this question. And that's what I want to end with. So these images on this slide are taken from the website of Neuralink. Neuralink is the name of the BCI apparatus, the brain-computer interface product that one of Elon Musk's company is producing. You might have heard Elon Musk referred to as developing some kind of technology that will allow people to connect their brains to computers. And so that's shown here. What we have is a very small device that is the link that's in that blue gloved hand that is surgically connected to a person's brain. So this does require brain surgery, which might present something of a hump for most people to get over who might be interested in this device. But conceptually, this is how it would work. There are neural threads in that connect directly to a human's neural network. Now, what we do know from the research that's been done, particularly funded by the US military, the Pentagon, is that it's possible to connect the person's brain, a neural tissue, their brain, to machine neurons, to an AI system, and that those two will communicate with one another. I'll give you a couple of examples of it and to end with. So on this slide, we have we have image Claudia Mitchell, who is the first woman to receive a brain-controlled prosthetic limb, and Jesse Sullivan, who was the first man to receive what's called a smart prosthetic. These are prosthetic limbs that can be controlled simply by thinking. So Claudia Mitchell lost her left arm in an accident, and she was able to have restored capacity by having a prosthetic limb. She can not only control this limb, she can also feel what she's picking up. And she can do this because of that BCI technology, that brain-computer interface technology. This is two-way, so-called closed-loop BCI, meaning that she can think about what she's doing, and the brain signaling that results causes that arm to move. As that arm touches things, encounters things, it can actually relay the sensation because it's engineered for what Ibn Rushd would call sensing, for detecting. So it will relay the signaling for what it's touching to her brain through the connections with her nerve tissue. And she can feel the objects that that prosthetic limb is touching. She can even feel pain if something heavy falls on that hand, or if she touches something that's really sharp and that would be experienced as painful for an organic limb. She feels the pain because that limb is engineered for that sensation of pressure and pain and whatever the texture of the surface is. In other words, because the limb is actually engineered for sensation, it is creating the same kind of signaling that an organic limb would create, and that's what makes it possible, right? So this is actually one of the most important pieces of evidence that we have for trying to answer this question. Will robots feel pain? Well, we could already ask the question about this robotic arm that is a prosthetic device for Claudia Mitchell and Jesse Sullivan. Does this robotic arm feel pain? Well, the signaling is there, right? If we take an organic limb and ask, can an organic limb feel pain? We would presume the answer to that to be yes, but we have to keep in mind that pain is subjective. So the only person who can feel that pain is the person who has the arm. And in this case, Claudia Mitchell could tell you when her arm is feeling pain. One last thing I'll show you, and this is Ian Burkhart, who is playing a guitar in this image. So before this image was taken, 2 or 3 years before, Ian Burkhart was in a diving accident. He was diving in shallow waters, and he ended up severing his spinal cord. As a result, he was unable to move his limbs from the neck down. So you might say, well, you just told us he's playing a guitar. How is that possible if he's paralyzed from the neck down? So he has a chip implanted in his brain. This chip was developed by funding from the Pentagon, from the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or DARPA. And the aim was to be able to both create new possibilities for warfare and to provide medical therapies for people who are injured in warfare. He did not need a brain chip. His spinal cord was injured. The brain chips have been developed for people who sustained traumatic brain injury. But Ian Burkhart asked his doctors to perform brain surgery on him, even though he did not need brain surgery. Remember, he injured his spinal cord, not his brain. Eventually, his doctors agreed, and he was able to get the brain chip. The brain chip reads his organic brain signaling. So when he thinks of moving that hand or those fingers that you see playing this guitar, those fingers move because they're connected to a sleeve that's on his arm that has wireless receptors. So when he thinks of moving that hand, the brain chip wirelessly sends those signals to the receptors on his arm that activate his motor neurons in his arm and fingers so that he can play the guitar. And that's the same kind of thing that happens in an purely organic situation, only this signal is bypassing his spinal cords. As we saw in the early example, human neurons will speak to machine neurons. They will pass messages back and forth, and they will do that. So it will demonstrate to us that this type of closed loop phenomenon is possible. I want to stop here and just end with this point that we can actually see examples of how machines, AIs that are engineered, can perform certain functions that are part of human biology. And I think what is useful as we deal with the progression of these technologies is to understand the capacities are reaching a point where we have to, before we ever ask the question, will a robot feel pain? Will a robot want human rights? We have to ask the question, how will we deal with the personhood of people who are like Ian Burkhart or Claudia Mitchell, who are part machine, who rely on these machine systems in order to have their mobility, whether it is practicing speech or walking around. They're not fully organic, but they are definitely able to participate in humanity. I would urge this does not alter their humanity at all. These are 100% human beings, even though they're part machine. So I want to thank you for this invitation. I want to thank you for the time as well to share with you. And I'm looking forward to the conversations that I'll have with members of the University of Florida community in the coming days. Thank you very much.